Continues next in our 1 hour heating and air conditioning weather center. We see morning showers in place, clouds, windy and cooler, a high of 51. Clear and a low of 38 overnight. Currently 47 at O'Hare, 51 Lakefront. Your next news update is at 7. Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan and Amy continues next on AM 560. The Answer.
This hourly segment is brought to you by Real Estate Revealed with Randy Barcella, Sunday mornings starting at 8.
See Michelle Malkin, Sean Hannity, and Laura Logan at Freedom Summit 2019. Tickets on sale now at freedomsummitchicago.com.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy, and it's been a minute or two since President Trump or Trump supporters were compared to Nazis. But that's why you got Bobby O'Rourke in the race for president, so that can be remedied. Bobby O compared Trump to Hitler, of course, standard issue stuff, but then provided a deeper explanation, sort of a second-level explanation, which I really appreciate. He went on with Wolf Blitzer to defend that comparison and frankly, indulge Wolf Blitzer's mispronunciation of Goebbels.
President Trump, perhaps inspired by Goebbels and the propagandists of the Third Reich, seemed to employ this tactic that the bigger the lie, the more obscene the injustice, the more dizzying the pace of this bizarre behavior, the less likely you were able to do something about it. Is that not going too far to make a comparison between the President of the United States and the Nazis?
Find me a better analogy of another leader of a Western democracy describing all people of one religion as inherently defective or disqualified or dangerous. And that's what the president has done when it comes to Muslims, seeking to ban all Muslims from this country. Repeating the lie that Mexican immigrants pose a violent risk to this country, calling them animals and predators and rapists and criminals, asking 4 women of color elected by their constituents to Congress to go back to their home country and having an almost Nuremberg-like rally where people are chanting, "Send her back." Or inviting the kind of violence based on the racism that he's inspired, where you have another crowd cheering when someone says shoot them, when the president asks, what do we do about these immigrants? It doesn't just offend our sensibilities, it poses a violent risk to our fellow Americans. 22 shot dead in El Paso, Texas by a gunman inspired by the president of the United States.
But you understand the criticism when you make any comparisons to the Holocaust and the Nazis, that is simply, at least most people say, that is unacceptable.
It's the comparison of last resort, and that's where we are. And I don't mean the last resort politically or the last resort in terms of defeating the president in November, but the last resort for this country that is descending into an open racism and intolerance and violence led by the president.
That's powerful. You got a lot in there. So you got your Goebbels, you got your Nuremberg rallies. That's you, Trump supporters. You're the participants at the Nuremberg rallies. And then you also, he shoehorned in there blaming Trump for the El Paso shooting.
Right.
That's a lot to get done in under 2 minutes. It's pretty good.
Not one man could commit another or convince another man to do what that man did in El Paso.
I think it's ironic too. I mean, for somebody who wants the state to come in and tear houses of worship asunder, to be talking about Nazism, projecting out Nazism. But I mean, I get that's what the left does. It's interesting as well, I find, that Bobby.
Don't forget, he wants to tear down the walls that are already in place and have been since he was born.
Oh, I understand.
El Paso.
No, I understand. Of course. Also, the gun confiscation, all of it, all the stuff that. Well, I mean, technically, those totalitarian states, but what's Beto Delecto? What's his name? Bobby O'Rourke. It's interesting as well that he's only at like 1% in the polls because, frankly, all those things that he misrepresented about things Trump never said about Muslims and things that he didn't say about Mexicans and postures he didn't take from a policy perspective. That's the same thing that all the other candidates are saying too. I don't know why Bobby doesn't have the appeal. He's more.
He was born to run. Remember, that's what he told Vanity Fair.
He's more iconoclastic than the others. So what's the problem there? For more on this topic and maybe a few others, we're pleased to be joined by Rich Lowry, editor of National Review, Fox contributor, author of the upcoming book, The Case for Nationalism, How It Made Us Powerful, United, and Free. Rich, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So,
I don't think I can do any better.
well, I mean,
with regard to Bobby than you did.
well, I mean, I don't. Maybe if he would have made the comparison to Gehring, I wouldn't have been as offended. Why can't Bobby O get traction?
Oh man, he's the worst. I mean, he's so clearly a phony. He's so clearly desperate. He's a punching bag in all these debates. He's the candidate everyone feels comfortable dunking on. You saw it with Pete Buttigieg and him the last debate, and he's immolated any chance he couldn't run for dog catcher in Texas now. And it's not just that he's cratering himself; he's discrediting progressive causes as he goes. I mean, gun control, the supposedly common sense proposals like a universal background check and a registry, no one's going to ever do it ever again, even if they're inclined, because Beto's given away the store because he says giving away the game because he said we're going to go door to door and confiscate guns, which you can't do unless you have a registry.
Right, but people thought that, or he said on MSNBC right after he proposed that people he thinks will do the right thing and just hand in their assault rifles.
Yeah, sure they will.
Yeah, well, when you've had universal background checks in a couple of these states, the number of background checks hasn't gone up. Because people haven't, if you're giving your gun to your cousin, you're not going to go to the feds, and fill out some form. You're just going to give it to them, So the idea that everyone who has their AR-15, in part because they want to protect themselves, is just going to hand it over because Beto says so. It's just crazy.
Rich,
it's one of the most shameful and ridiculous presidential campaigns ever.
Well, I have a theory why that is. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Bobby O is a Russian asset.
Oh, there you go. Now you done it.
Because they hate Germans, right? they fought against them in World War II.
He's undermining the progressive.
Maybe. I can see
he's undermining
That's
the progressive
right, yeah.
case. He's a stalking horse for Trump, like everybody else.
Yeah, I think you're onto something. I hadn't thought of it that way.
All right.
The amazing thing is Pete Buttigieg, who actually I think is has a shot now and clearly has traction in Iowa. He's asked about that Hillary smear of Tulsi on Meet the Press. It was remarkable. He was just extremely reluctant to say anything negative about it when he's trying to position himself as the moderate, which just goes to show how just deep that sentiment is on the left now, the paranoia about Russia. At National Review, we spent about 60 years just trying to get them slightly concerned about Russia. And all it took was the 2016 election, and now they see a red under every bed.
Yeah, I mean, what? I wonder if somebody would be willing to criticize Bernie for loving those Soviet puppet shows back in the day. Maybe not.
Yeah, right.
So, what do you think happened to Kamala Harris? I mean, I talk about somebody who is a disappointing campaign. I expected so much more out of her.
Well, I think she's also just a phony. She doesn't know who she is. She should be running as like a really harsh and tough prosecutor. That's her thing. But she's puts on this phony kind of cheerful demeanor, and people can smell insincerity, a mile away. And two, she doesn't know where she's positioned ideologically. So she endorses Medicare for all to kind of chase Bernie down the left-wing track, and then she realizes she can't say out loud that she wants to cancel everyone's health insurance, or if she does, it doesn't work out. So she backs off that. So she's sort of in this in-between position and doesn't really have a flavor one way or the other. So and in the debate last week when she tried to turn on Elizabeth Warren and get a moment out of kicking Trump off Twitter, that was also particularly pathetic.
Yeah, it's weak. I want to go back to Mannequin Pete and his ascension in Iowa, and there is this open lane, Warren and Biden still with some staying power, but this third lane. And I mean, I can believe it sort of intellectually, but I just can't believe it viscerally that the mayor of South Bend could go from that, and by the way, not a successful 10 years mayor of South Bend, to the nominee for a major party for president of the United States. But I see that as a real possibility. Barack Obama served the identitarians in 2008. It was time for a minority nominee, particularly a black nominee, and that was part of Obama's appeal. There's no question about it. And a decade later, isn't it time for the LGBTQ movement to be served their identity representative?
Yeah, I would say that the similarity with Obama that I think is deeper and maybe more important is Buttigieg is articulate as hell and clearly really smart, right? Now, maybe exaggerated how smart he is in the press. That always happens. But he hasn't had a bad debate moment. He had maybe one when he had trouble explaining why he didn't fire the police chief, if his own police department was so bad because of this officer-involved shooting.
Right.
Besides that, he is so fluid. He runs circles around Beto. And he projects to me, I also have a hard time seeing him win the nomination, but he could very well have a trajectory like Gary Hart to go way back in 1984 or John Edwards in 2004. And I'm not suggesting, eventually blowing up in some horrific scandal, but just someone who came from nowhere, who was disregarded at the beginning and has like a really strong second or third finish that surprises people. He clearly has that kind of upside. Now, the reason you can't see him win the nomination is hard is, as you point out, Mayor of South Bend. It's an enormous leap. The lack of appeal to African Americans. Now, if you're winning early states, maybe that changes a little bit, but I think it's harder for Pete to change than anyone else. We've actually seen Warren. We've said this about Warren for a while. She doesn't have any appeal. Well, now that her polling's picking up in general, she's beginning to get a little bit of African American support. But maybe that happens with Pete, but I think it's harder for him.
Don't you see Pete as a vice president, though? Like a vice president?
Could be, yeah, could be. The lowest trajectory would be HUD secretary. The highest trajectory would be VP.
Oh, the Ben Carson position. Nice.
He's the only one still left from the original cast.
Yeah.
But the Pete thing, though, I mean, number one, he doesn't get the press coverage he got from the outset if he's not gay. Number two, I just go back and say, that's a cause celeb. The way that and in the identitarian obsession of the left, I think that is being vastly underestimated as a motivator for that electorate.
Certainly, I would think it has to have a huge role in his fundraising, which is an off the charts because he goes to the coasts and on this articulate gay married guy who could be president or at least representing well in these primaries, and people just throw money at him. So the fundraising race, you would think Buttigieg is a front runner, and Biden is and also ran. And Biden, I have to say, I've been a skeptic all along, but the national polling is holding up okay for him, which I'm sort of surprised. There was another poll yesterday that had him up by 10, but in Iowa and some of these early states, it's not looking so great, and he can conceivably finish like fourth in Iowa, which I think would be a killer.
I want to get to the NBA in Hong Kong. Story in the New York Times about these young people that are protesting the Beijing communists for their freedom, writing goodbye letters. New York Times. Young protesters writing farewell notes to family and friends in the event they're arrested or killed. They call them last letters. Some carry handwritten copies to the streets in their backpacks or wallets. Others hide them at home in drawers and under mattresses. And several of them were memorialized in this piece of the New York Times. And I just hope they're CCing LeBron James on those letters.
Yeah, I mean, the whole thing has been pathetic and disgusting, and these world famous athletes make an enormous amount of money playing a game and have zero connection to our country or values, or at least none that matters if a foreign society waves some money in front of them. And just have a little self-respect, and the idea that Hong Kong is complicated. When they portray everything else, as a matter of black and white, people being pulled over, black people at disproportionate rates, is something they'll pronounce on at great length and great ease, even though actually, if you get into it, that's complicated, right?
Yeah.
So this has been really dismaying. And in my book about nationalism, The Case for Nationalism, I read about how technological change in the 19th, early 20th century, it made us more national. It made business elites have a more national perspective than they had before when they were more local. And changes since then, more lately, last couple of decades, have given the business elite a more transnational or global perspective. And this is a symbol of that that couldn't be starker. that if China has a bigger market than us, it's going to have the loyalty of businessmen, which what these NBA athletes and teams are, more than the United States. And that's an extremely concerning thing.
Well, and it's also interesting, too, I mean, that despite their shilling for communist thugs, they have no problem making ridiculous comparisons to the problems we have in this country. Kyrie Irving plays for the Celtics, saying there's enough oppression in this country to comment on. We don't have to focus on oppression in China.
Right. As though we have a dictatorial government that's trying to crush our sovereignty and shooting at or suppressing protesters every day. I mean, it's completely insane. And China, it's going to be an important market. It already is, but it's still only 10% of their revenue. Just imagine when it's like 40% of their revenue, right? I mean, they'll be, favoring the invasion of Taiwan.
You wrote a piece in the National Review about Ted Williams. I just wanted you to recount part of that because the contrast between Ted Williams and some athletes of a bygone era as compared to the LeBron Jameses of the world is pretty stark.
Yeah, I mean, Ted Williams went over and bombed Chinese communists because his country asked him to. And, at first didn't do it willingly. He'd already lost 3 years of service to World War II, thought it was unfair, and the Marines were just trying to get attention by re-upping him for the Korean War. But then said, okay, it's my duty. I'm going to go over, and flew 30-something missions, got shot up several times, had an amazing crash landing where his plane was on fire. And the normal procedure would have been to eject, but he feared if he ejected, he'd break his knees or maybe his back and never play again. So he landed this thing without the landing gear down, just a belly crash on the runway. And that was when men were men and men were patriotic. And it was, there's an athlete that the entire country could have been proud of for what he did and had a deep attachment to this country. And I fear that's just something we're losing.
What Rich is trying to say, Amy, is that Ted Williams would not have been at National Period Day on Saturday.
On Menstruation Day. National Menstruation Day, yeah.
Rich Lowry, editor, National Review, Fox contributor, author of the upcoming book, The Case for Nationalism, How It Made Us Powerful, United, and Free. Rich, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, guys.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
The more you listen, the more you'll know. This is Chicago's Morning Answer. Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
The Lou Dobbs Financial Report is brought to you by Signature Bank, helping local businesses succeed. Visit signaturebank.bank for your commercial banking needs.
I'm Lou Dobbs. Colorado bails on an effort to block Sprint T-Mobile merger, virtual restaurants surging in popularity, and SeaWorld plans a non-sea theme park in San Diego. Those stories next.
G'day, I'm Scott from Plug-in Pest Free. If you have a rodent or pest problem at your home or business, don't spray harmful toxic chemicals. Use Plug-in Pest Free, the electromagnetic pest control device that uses your wiring